handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEBT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could be with us. And I'd like to give a big shout out to some of the affiliates, WJHC at 107.5 FM, serving North Florida. And yet another affiliate, happy to be a part of, WLBB 1330 AM and 106.3 FM, serving West Georgia. And certainly part of Talk America Radio. But you know, got some old friends with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, and that is the Pacific Legal Foundation. I just so love these lawyers. Imagine that, loving lawyers. But these guys are the good guys. And so I got lawyer du jour today with us, and that's Jeff McCoy. And what we're actually going to talk about is Ryan Zinke at the Department of Interior and this monuments study that was done and the recommendations that have been made. So Jeff, thanks for traveling along with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, well, Denise, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come talk monuments with you.
I don't even know how we got here to the whole monuments thing, but it just was a real head scratcher with what Obama did in his last year as president. So I'm going to kind of start off with that. And it's kind of like government abuse. But what was the real reason that Obama decided to take all of these acres of land, and then I might add water, miles and miles of water, and essentially nationalize them? What was the deal with that? Using some kind of Antiquities Act?
Yeah, and so I'll start from the beginning just to provide some background. The Antiquities Act was passed in 1906, and as its name suggests, it was passed to protect antiquities, archaeological sites. And there was an issue with vandalizing and stealing of various archaeological sites on public lands, and so Congress passed the Antiquities Act. And the language, it's a pretty short act, and the language says that the president can withdraw areas to protect objects of scientific or historic significance. But one of the limitations on it is it has to be the smallest area compatible with the protection of those objects. Oh,
smallest.
Yeah, and so, like I said, most of the problems that Congress tried to pass, trying to address with this was stealing of various archaeological sites. However, since its passage, there has been back and forth about the scope of the Antiquities Act, about what it can protect or what it can't protect. But overall, it was used relatively sparingly until the last few presidential administrations, and the Obama administration was the worst. He used it to reserve over 550 million acres of land and water, which is more than all the previous presidents combined. Now, the stated purpose of this is to protect various areas of public land, to provide some protection of these wilderness areas and these other areas. But the practical effect is that it prevents a lot of uses on these lands, including ranching, timber production, oil and gas production, and And the important aspect is that the President Obama specifically, this is a unilateral action, and it's not something that has to go through Congress, where our elected representatives would be able to balance all of the interests. Instead, it's one person who is deciding to lock up millions of acres of land.
This, we had some kind of brouhaha a couple of years ago at the Bundy Ranch out there in, what was it, Nevada, I think, because these ranchers had what was called grazing permits, and so for Obama to take 550 million acres, that would also take away that inventory of acreage for grazing permits, correct?
Well, so it depends on the monument, and however the short answer is yes, but the long answer is some of the proclamations designating these monuments allege to allow grazing. Most of the language says something like allowing grazing to the extent practical to protect the objects. However, history shows us that ultimately grazing is going to be reduced. If you look at the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah, which was designated in the final days of the Clinton administration, that proclamation says that grazing should continue, and President Clinton even said grazing will continue in historic levels. However, since the designation of that monument, the amount of grazing on that monument has been greatly reduced as a result of the monument, and this happens in many monuments across the nation, and so it does have the practical effect both for these ranchers, but also for the communities which rely on ranching. It's a big part of their economies, local economies, and so it not only hurts the ranchers, it hurts the local economies as well.
This antiquities action by Obama actually affected about 6 states. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so. And I don't have the numbers of states right on me, but yes, it did, mostly in the West. About almost half of the land in the West is owned or controlled by the federal government. And while not all of that is monument, it does have a big impact on the relationship between the federal government and the state governments. And because there's so much land controlled by the government in these western states, it allows presidents to abuse the Antiquities Act and remove productive uses on these lands and these communities.
Now, Jeff, when it comes to the non-government kind of stakeholders, or the tribal factions out there, they were significantly affected. So I would say there were probably some lawsuits in the pipeline against the action that Obama took, which caused Ryan Zinke, the Secretary of the Department of Interior, to do this study, including all kinds of interviews and getting public comments and those kinds of things. Were there lawsuits about to happen or already in the pipeline on this action?
Well, so there was a couple of lawsuits filed. One in Oregon, where actually the land that was designated a monument had previously been designated by Congress as suitable for timber production and required for timber production. Of course, here at Pacific Legal Foundation, we also filed a lawsuit challenging the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument off the coast of Massachusetts. We represent the Massachusetts Lobstermen Association.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay.
And the issue is with that case is that the monument designation prevented these fishermen from doing their job, and the big problem is that the Antiquities Act says that the president can reserve land, and in this
not
case,
water. I remember this interview. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so those were a couple of lawsuits. The backlash for the main ones in Utah, mainly the big one that's been talked about is Bears Ears National Monument. Most of the backlash hadn't come from lawsuits, but from politicians. In fact, almost every single elected official, including the entire Utah congressional delegation, opposed the Bears Ears National Monument as designated by President Obama. A couple of congressmen from Utah had proposed a bill, a compromise bill that would have protected some areas, ensured that ranching and other production would have remained intact, and it would have allowed some control by tribes. However, instead of going through the political process of having Congress pass a bill, which is usually how laws are made, President Obama decided to use the Antiquities Act to lock up about 1.2 million acres of land in that area unilaterally.
Jeff, has there actually been a study on when Obama did this and essentially nationalized this property, the revenue stream stopped? Has there been some kind of a study on what the revenue stream was due to, grazing permits and agriculture and timbering and, other kinds of, park access and mineral rights and all those kinds of things? I mean, I would imagine that each of these states, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, would say, this is costing us X dollars into the revenue stream, and certainly loss of any kind of control, meaning the feds could come in there unannounced any time and take what other kind of abusive actions. So do we know what kind of dollars we were necessarily talking about, Jeff?
Well, so for the Bears Ears, because it's still relatively new, we don't know the full effects, and it's also why it's so imperative that it be reduced early on. But I know that there's a think tank out in Utah called the Sutherland Institute that has done some research on how another monument, the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument, has affected it. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it has, and especially because of grazing, it has significantly affected those communities. Mm-hmm. Now, those that support the monument say that the communities have received some subsidies, some benefits because it's a national monument and people will go visit. But again, this study from the Sutherland Institute shows that the harms from the losses of use, the harms outweigh any benefits from the increased tourism. And in fact, there have been studies, including from my colleague Todd Gaziano, who is our executive director of our DC Center. He's looked into it and shown that it can even affect the Department of Interior revenues, because most of the time the Department of Interior, they charge for grazing permits, and they get fees for that. But without these fees, it can actually they have a maintenance backlog, so they can't even do what they're supposed to do in terms of protection. So it actually in turn hurts the protection of these areas, because the Department of Interior doesn't have enough resources to manage the lands without the revenue from the grazing permits and other permits. And I think it shows that these uses of these lands isn't antithetical to the protection of the resources. They go hand in hand, and if you ever talk to a rancher, they certainly have the biggest interest in preserving the resources on the land, because that's how they make their money.
Well, that was proven to be so, going all the way back to the whole Bundy Ranch kind of thing. Those ranchers don't pay a lot of money, I might add, for grazing permits, but they do assume the responsibility, and they actually want the responsibility of keeping those lands in good condition for the sake of, continued grazing. So,
absolutely.
Was there a water component in any of this thing that, as the reason that Obama did what he did, kind of in some kind of collusion with the EPA? Or am I just throwing something in there that doesn't need to be in there?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I don't know exactly why he used the Antiquities Act to lock up so much land. But I do know that the abuse has greatly negatively affected communities where these monuments are.
Sure. what on the mineral rights side was there some kind of? I mean, was that all? Since the water, we can't really throw water into this argument, and control of water, as the EPA like to do. Was there some kind of rare earth minerals or some other kind of minerals mining that was part of all this? That do you think, or am I throwing that in there that doesn't need to be in there?
Well, the monuments will prevent anybody. So traditionally, if you're a U.S. citizen, you can go out and you can locate mineral claims and develop them. And these monuments prevent that from happening. Mm-hmm. It also, again, allegedly, those that already have mining claims will be protected because they already have that interest.
Right.
The reality is that these monuments make it extremely hard to ever develop those mineral rights, and because of all of the extra loophole or extra hoops that you have to go through in order to develop it as a result of these monument designations. And so, yes, and the mineral development is going to be another industry that is greatly affected by these monument designations.
Something in my gut, and I'm not necessarily conspiratorial, but something in my gut also tells me that some foreign entities, particularly I would say China, might have offered some kind of a deal for some mineral rights mining in some of those lands too, but I can't prove it. I'm just going to throw it out there for the sake of the listeners. But there might be some kind of a foreign access fee or permit that they were given. All right, so we have Ryan Zinke, who has actually delivered a draft report to the White House. He conducted a whole bunch of meetings, and he visited a lot of these places, and so we have submitted essentially a preliminary, but we don't have some kind of a formal recommendation yet, do we, Jeff?
Well, so he did submit a report to the president. So back in April, the president issued an executive order requesting that Secretary Zinke review all these monuments, and in August he submitted a report to the president with his recommendations. He didn't release it. It has since been leaked to the press.
Oh, imagine that.
Yeah. And so there are some generalized recommendations. In general, he recommends reducing 4 national monuments, changing some of the uses on a few other national monuments. But he doesn't get into the specifics of how much to reduce the monuments. It is fairly vague. And in fact, it's a little bit of a disappointment because it's going to have some effect, and it will be positive if the president chooses to follow the recommendations and reduce some of these monuments. But it doesn't address the bigger problem where originally there was over 25 monuments that were under review, and he only decided that 4 were worth reducing, and he's actually made a recommendation for a couple new national monuments as well. And so ultimately, it doesn't address the fundamental problem of the abuse of the Antiquities Act.
We had an August 24th deadline on the final report, did we not?
Yeah, and that was and many people thought that the president was going to act quickly after that report was delivered, but nothing has happened yet, and we'll see if the president chooses at some point to either follow the recommendation of Secretary Zinke or go further, or not follow it at all. But right now, it's really just a waiting game.
Mm-hmm. What is Pacific Legal Foundation's role? I mean, are you just kind of being the land cop on this to see what really shakes out, since we only somehow have a leaked report to see what the final undoing of the executive order is, such that you will take additional action? Is that what the position is of the Pacific Legal Foundation?
Yeah, we submitted comments both for Beers Ears and for the Northeast Canyons National Monument during the review process. We explained that the president does have the authority to reduce these monuments. We reminded the Secretary of the language of the Antiquities Act that it should be the smallest area compatible. And as you said, right now, though, we'll have to wait for an ultimate decision to see how it plays out, to see if we will get involved in litigation, to see what we'll do for our client's interest in Massachusetts. But yeah, as you said, all we have is a leaked, pretty general report right now, and we'll have to assess once we get an actual decision from the president.
And is Pacific Legal Foundation still kind of tracking the whole waterway kind of thing too, the miles of water for the fishermen? Yeah,
and as of now, because the case is still going forward because nothing has changed, especially for our clients, and so we will continue on that. One of the recommendations in Secretary Zinke's report was that the president allow fishing in the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Monument. But again, without any specifics, we don't know how that's going to affect our client, how much fishing is going to be allowed, or even if that decision is going to be made. So we are going to continue along with that case, and once a decision comes out, we'll have to reevaluate.
Well, I fully expect you, Jeff, or Todd, or Jonathan to be on horseback here at some point, chasing Ryan Zinke around to see what he's doing on the land. And you could be yourself on a crab boat or a shrimp boat or, some other kind of fishing boat to, do a Facebook Live kind of event, kind of to push Trump to handle this situation in some kind of timely order. Are we expecting that?
Well, I don't know about the horseback. I know my colleagues. I don't think they're, and I'm not either. We're not big horseback riders, but we have been holding a lot of events about this issue. Todd Gaziano especially has done a lot of work on this, and we continue to host events, bring it to the attention of the public, and hopefully put some pressure on the administration to act.
All right. Well, tell Todd that I am looking forward to a Facebook Live when he's out there in some saltwater gear and.
We'll do. I'll definitely pass it along to him.
Well, look. Thank you guys over there at Pacific Legal Foundation for the work that you're doing on this, because it did have even us basic citizens that don't know a lot about all of this pretty upset when all this happened. So we're glad that you have been here with the Denise Simon Experience to explain where we are in this process, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it. So I'm going to tap you guys on the shoulder here again, not to the too distant future, to see where we are. So thank you, Jeff.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having us. And for more information, I would urge your listeners to go to pacificlegal.org. We actually have a newly renovated website.
Yes, you do. Thank you for mentioning that. I forgot.
Your listeners can continue to follow our work on this and all our other cases that we're working on.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
Donald Trump came to Washington vowing to drain the swamp and make government work for the American people. But the swamp creatures in D.C. aren't going down without a fight, and the deep state is determined to overturn the election and keep their gravy train rolling. In these turbulent times, it's critical for patriots to stay engaged and be prepared to defend this president. You can stay up to date on Trump's battle to make America great again by listening to America First Radio with Jim Dawes each weeknight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Liberty Feed.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us. KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, ladies and gentlemen. Help me give a warm welcome to Sam Faddis, my old buddy, former CIA weapons of mass destruction, who is still in the mix in that world somewhat, doing contract work. But the biggest part of everything about Sam is that he is running for U.S. Senate in Maryland. And we're going to get rid of Mr. Cardin if we can. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
Your campaign is doing something called a 51 and done. Would you tell us about that?
Right. So 51 and done is based on the idea that Mr. Cardin, as of right now, has already been in office, amazingly enough, for 51 years. Hence the concept 51 and done, which we also use, obviously, as a fundraising jingle. He'll actually have been in office for 52 years by the time he stands for re-election, which is just staggering.
Now, you know, we're on this kind of freight train that is getting rid of old guard. And I would say that somebody who has been in lawmaking politics for that long is clearly a gargoyle I mean, he's like cracked and he's just kind of sitting up there and he needs to go. So 51 and done is a very good little jingle, but is that also how much when you get your little campaign contributions, you want a $51 contribution?
Well, 51 is great. I mean, if you can give me $2,750, that's also great. But here's the bottom line. We don't have a rich uncle, and we're not bought by anybody. This is all about small donors and real people, which is the way it should be. So, hey, $5 is fine. I mean, we stretch every dollar in this campaign.
Well, how big is his war chest? Or does he really expressed an interest to kind of stay in this job?
Amazingly enough, he does. You would think that the man would have something else to do at this point in his life. But apparently his ambition is to die behind his desk in the U.S. Senate, I guess. So, yeah, he does. His war chest is somewhere close to $2 million. But here's the thing with these guys. It doesn't matter because it basically, you should look at it as an unlimited credit card. I mean, if he runs out of money, he'll just whistle up special interests all over the country and millions of dollars will flood in. Fortunately, as I think we're seeing, money ain't everything. The people's vote still counts, and if you get out there and work, they can pour all the money they want in. They're still going to lose.
What has he done for Maryland?
Run it into the ground.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is a guy that's part and parcel of an establishment that has destroyed the economy of this state. One of the things here's the bottom line. Maryland used to be a huge industrial state. I mean, Baltimore used to be one of the greatest industrial cities on the face of the planet. All of that industry is gone. And what has kept Maryland afloat for decades has been the federal payroll out of Washington, D.C. The state lives in fear now because no matter who's in office, Judgment Day is coming. The bureaucracy is contracting. The budget will go down. Spending is decreasing. And now you're back to the point where, you cannot afford to continue to drive all business out of the state and rely upon simply a federal payroll, which is where the state is right now.
I'm trying to remember that. I think I was in Baltimore, 6 or 7 years ago when they redid the whole waterfront. They did a rocking job. And, there's a lot of benefit to what Baltimore and history has to offer, but it just seems like it just can't get off the starting line, can it?
It suffers from the ills of other industrial cities in the United States. I mean, we've pursued policies at the federal level for at least 30 years now that have gutted our manufacturing base, sent jobs overseas, and left people scrambling. So, parts of Baltimore are beautiful, and parts of Baltimore are filled with folks that have been effectively abandoned. There are no jobs. There are no prospects. The educational system is terrible. They have no hope in the current economy of getting out of there. And that's what we got to fix.
All right. Well, since Baltimore is so close to Washington, D.C., let's kind of travel on over inside the Beltway. Because I would say, Sam, that when it comes to ranking of importance of issues in Washington, D.C., the issues don't change, but somehow their rankings of importance get adjusted kind of constantly. And the one thing out of the chute with the new administration in the White House was repeal and replace Obamacare. I mean, just hear it hourly. But now that it's essentially been shelved because we can't seem to move the mark on that one, and now we've gone to some kind of tax reform. Well, the tax plan that has been proposed last week, I would say, is just that, it's a plan and not reform, meaning that we're still going to have a whole lot of pages to the tax code. Now, given a handful of hurricanes and given those devastations, given a infusion into defense, escalating some military conflict in Afghanistan, trying to put some ordnance back into our inventory because we're running out of ordnance, and then North Korea, I'm not sure that tax reform can happen in 2017. I think that there's going to be where once we might have some cooperation from the Democrats, something in my gut tells me, no, that's just not going to happen. What say you?
Well, I think it can happen, but I agree with you. All we have at this point are some sort of marks on a wall, a plan. I mean, I think tax reform is critical. Both individual and corporate tax reform is critical to getting this economy moving. And, I think it is a valid concern that you can't simply cut revenue coming in without cutting spending unless you're going to take a skyrocketing deficit and already make it worse. I'm a believer you get the economy moving, we can offset a lot of those cuts by increased revenue if we actually have economic growth that we want. But look, as an aside, to go off on a little bit of a tangent, I mean, I think what both this business about the so-called Affordable or Unaffordable Care Act and tax reform shows is that this first move, the election of Donald Trump, whether you like him, hate him, somewhere in the middle, but this move to break the establishment in Washington, D.C. by electing this president is just that. I mean, he's sitting there in the White House, and he is facing in both parties an entrenched establishment. And even the folks and many of the people that theoretically are in his own party are working against him, which is, and that is the reality. So the next step has to be the battle in the Congress, electing representatives and electing senators who actually believe we need to drain the swamp and we need to get rid of the establishment.
Well, it is business as usual in just about everything that there is, because we're not fixing some of the other political infrastructure. And I would say that includes the lobbyists, the other special interest, foreign money, what happens in committee, and nobody, there's never a consequence for some of these people, even at the agency level, to be doing wrong things. There is not a consequence. People don't go to jail. People are barely even suspended, if that. Wall Street, those banks just pay a fine and they just kind of keep trucking along. And Sam, I would argue that is really what has voters probably the most angry, is there's virtually not a consequence. I mean, John Q. Public, it is constantly being arrested or called in or fined or all these other kinds of things, but not inside this beltway. And when it comes to nefarious email servers and money and weird foreign aid and all these other kinds of things, they just seem to kind of truck along, which I would say then maybe we ought to be looking at the ethics rules in both houses. Is that something that I think the Oversight Committee might be missing?
Well, I think the Oversight Committees are obviously missing it, but this is back to what we were talking about a minute ago. The issue here is not simply electing a different guy and putting him in the Oval Office. The issue is that we need a massive transformation in Washington, D.C. I was talking to a very good friend of mine who's helping me on the campaign, prominent filmmaker, a few weeks ago, said to him something about how the campaign was going, and he responded to me with one line, a very good friend, said, "You're not making a campaign, you're making a revolution." And that is the way you have to look at this. Obviously, I'm not talking about armed insurrection.
Sure.
But that is the scope of what is required in Washington, D.C. That is how broken it is. You have an entrenched bureaucracy that doesn't think it is answerable to anyone. You have establishment politicians that basically intend to wait out Donald Trump and just return to business as usual. The magnitude of what needs changed is just sometimes
epic.
Very difficult to get your head around. Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about accountability. Absolutely. Good God, when we had the whole VA scandal, we had people go up to Congress, lie through their teeth under oath, go back in the VA. They were removed from one job, put on the bench for a few months, and then trotted out a few months later for more senior positions. They were promoted and pushed up through the bureaucracy in complete defiance of the American people and Congress. I mean, that's why I say, okay, so this battle now moves to the House and to the Senate. You have got to throw out these people. And quite frankly, I'm not just talking about Democrats. I'm running as a Republican. I'm talking about people who are all part of the problem. I mean, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You need to go.
Mm-hmm. So then this tells me that the issues, and this is, I guess, if we kind of, go to bottom line here, the issues that are clearly facing us that need to be fixed just aren't going to be fixed either. Meaning, you're not going to get repeal of Obamacare. You're not going to get some kind of replacement that anybody's going to agree with. And we're not going to end up with any kind of quality tax reform. So now we're back then to, I guess we need to go down to the agency level and start addressing regulations page by page, that maybe some change could be made at the secretary level and forget about the Congress. Is that even viable?
Well, I mean, a lot of that is already happening under the Trump administration because they are so log jammed in Congress. They're already moving on changing a lot of regulations and doing what they can do by the executive order. But I don't think the answer is that you settle for that. I mean, I think the answer is that the next major fight it comes in the midterm elections. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what this is. You keep talking about, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. In the state of Maryland, in the last 4 years, the cost of premiums under this act have doubled, and they just approved a 50% increase. So there was a study out just the other day talking about the new uninsured class in America is the middle class. That's where we are, that the people who pay the taxes to pay for Medicare and pay for Medicaid themselves at the end of the day can't afford to buy health insurance anymore. That is madness, and yet that is the reality, not of where we might be, but where we are today. So those things, we have failed. I mean, the Congress has failed in the last few months to do anything about it, but we can't afford for that to continue.
Yeah, we can't afford the failure.
No, that's not acceptable. This is a Thelma and Louise situation. Remember how the movie ends? They sail off the cliff?
Yeah.
You can turn left or you can turn right or we can do something. I tell you, the one thing we cannot do is continue at this speed on this course because the outcome is certain, and that's exactly where we're going right now.
When you travel around your state and, you're attending pancake breakfasts and, hitting up voters over here and having a chat with some others over here, they look at you with this look on your face, and I know that they want to necessarily, okay, Sam, we're going to vote for you, but can you? Can you what? What are they asking you for?
Well, everything they want, 90% of what anybody wants to talk about are the same things we've been talking about so far. Mm-hmm. They're all pocketbook issues or what I call kitchen table issues, what family sits around at the kitchen table at night trying to balance the checkbook and figure out if they can afford to replace the dishwasher that just stopped working or pay for health care. That's what they want to talk about. In terms of can you, well, I mean, a lot of them are cynical. They have every right to be cynical. Mm-hmm. I mean, they want to know, after you get elected, is the next time I'm going to see you when you're running for office again?
Again. Mm-hmm.
Is that the only time you're going to come down in my neighborhood? Is that the only time you're going to bother to talk to me? Mm-hmm. Well, those are all legitimate questions, and all I tell them is, look, I'm just going to give you my word, and then you're going to have to hold me accountable. And you should hold me accountable, and if I don't measure up and I don't fulfill my promises, then you ought to toss me the hell out of there.
All right. right. Well, let's leave the Beltway and let's travel internationally here for a second, because there seems to be some kind of a trend, and that is there's been a lot of discussion, Sam, about dividing up Iraq. In other words, and some have proposed even dividing it up into 4 separate nations, if you will. Certainly, where the Peshmerga, the Kurds, get their own territory, and they voted on that last week overwhelmingly, and yet it's an unbinding vote. And sadly, the United States just doesn't seem to want to come to their defense, meaning give them some credibility that they ought to have their own region, their own government, which they really already have. Then we have the same thing in Syria. Syria isn't any different today, I would argue, than it was at the beginning of this civil war over there, and Assad is still in power. They have talked about dividing Syria up as well. Then we have this Catalan referendum that just happened in Spain, where violence erupted, and they want their own region too. A separation from Spain is, and then we had the whole Brexit thing. What is really happening here are some voices of people just in their own way saying we're fed up with this leadership and we kind of want to take into our own destiny in some of these countries? I mean, is this some kind of a trend that nobody has really recognized?
If I was to look at all those things, I mean, I think I would categorize them as symptomatic of different things. I mean, I think the Brexit thing is a reflection of what we've seen in in our own country, what Steve Bannon would call economic nationalism. Mm-hmm. We're tired of this whole globalism thing. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily working out for us. In Catalonia, I think what you see is that they've decided that since we're part of the EU, we can get that. Basically, the EU can do for us what a national government used to do for us. So there's no reason why we got to stay under Madrid. Mm-hmm. And in the Middle East, what do you see? You see a bunch of borders that were put in place by the Brits and the French 100 years ago or so that are coming apart at the seams. What bothers me most in the Middle East right now, in the areas that you talked about, is the extent to which what we're doing is facilitating the expansion of Iranian influence.
Yeah, I knew you were going to go there.
Well, I mean, we're turning Iraq over as a client state of the Iranian.
Had it. Yeah,
and then we got, and then we have the Kurds, who have been loyal allies of us for a long time, even when maybe we didn't deserve it, because we left them high and dry on more than one occasion. And there's no way on earth we can do that again. I mean, whether that means full independence or whether that means federalism, I'm not sure exactly. But you can't just abandon those guys to the tender mercies of everybody else in the Middle East. That's not right. They've stood by us. They're the only guys that don't run away half the time, in my experience.
Well, they don't run away. That's clearly a fact. They've demonstrated that, and they're digging in their heels. So when we talked about going back over to the Beltway, and we talked about the whole political infrastructure that needs kind of its own revolution, I would argue in a lot of cases the UN does too, because all of these country leaders send their UN diplomats to the United Nations and tell them how to vote and for it. And so the UN doesn't want to change anything either, meaning that it would have some kind of influence on what happens with the Peshmerga, what happens in Syria, what happens in Iraq, what happens in North Korea. So Sam, I'm not trying to be a pessimist here. I guess I'm really kind of being a realist. I don't see a lot of that really changing either. Do you?
With the United Nations, no. I mean, look,
okay.
I when I talk about the United Nations, I always say, look, I think it's a useful body to facilitate discussion, encourage cooperation. I'm all for that. But I have very limited expectations of the United Nations. It is not a world government We're not subordinating ourselves to it. We're not taking orders from the United Nations. End of story. So they're going to do some good, but if you're waiting for them to do any of the heavy lifting on anything, well, you're going to be waiting a really long time. That's not the way the world works.
A long time. And that's a sad commentary, because I don't see it really any different. Well, real quickly, let's talk about the fact that we're waiting on China to deal with North Korea, and I argue that that just isn't going to happen. But what we haven't heard specifically is whatever North Korea does, China, it's going to be your fault. If anybody is hurt, it's your fault. And in the meantime, North Korea continues to operate with wild abandon. And now Russia has actually given them their second major infrastructure access to the internet, where China has given them their first platform. Where is this going to go?
Well, first of all, let's put this out there. We're having this confrontation with the North Koreans not because Donald Trump said some mean things to them, but because our policy toward the North Koreans for decades now has failed to stop them. Because we're trapped into this pattern of say tough things and then always cave in and concede. Mm-hmm. So they're not provoking us because they think we're going to fight back. They're provoking us because they've learned over time that we're not going to fight back and they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. I'm not convinced that the Chinese won't ultimately provide the necessary leverage, but I am convinced that in order to get them to do that, we're going to have to play real hardball with the Chinese. And I see that the Trump administration has started to do that by really ramping up some of these economic measures. But, I mean, if it were me, I would say to the Chinese, behind closed doors, there's no money to be made by doing this in public. Look, the status quo is broken. It's unacceptable to us. These guys have to give up their nuclear weapons program, and that's the end of the story. And either you help us make that happen, or we're going to have to look at every other point in the status quo and decide where we're going to make it disadvantageous to you. I don't know. Let's start with this. We used to have nuclear weapons in South Korea till the early 1990s.
Put them back.
Put them back. Okay? You think this
and
is such a fun...
hand some to Japan while you're at it.
Yeah, this is such a funny game. Let's put American nuclear missiles back within a couple of minutes of the Chinese border. Maybe that will get somebody's attention. Let's just start talking about it and doing a feasibility study. That's probably about all you'd have to do. Let's go re-examine what weapons we sell to the Taiwanese. Let's go down the list of every pressure point with the Chinese, cutting off companies doing trade in the United States, et cetera. You know, this is not a fun game anymore, right? Maybe you need to rein in your dog, get him back on the leash, and shut down this nuclear weapons program.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, 51 and done for Sam Faddis for U.S. Senate, Maryland. Sam, we're so grateful for you wanting to be in the game, and we're going to try and push you there. So visit samfaddisforsenate.com? Or
yes,
Faddis?
Ma'am.
Okay.
You can just go to samfaddis.com.
samfaddis.com. There it is.
You can find us everywhere. Facebook, website, Twitter, every place in the social media universe you can be, we are.
Thank you, Sam. Glad to have you back.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We're coming with you, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er. Out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I'm very happy that you could stay along for the ride. I got an old friend with us who's certainly been with us before, who, he's more of a patriot than probably anybody I know or any 200 people I know put together, because he's doing our work for us, and that's Trevor Loudon. And Trevor's an author. Trevor's a movie producer. Trevor's his own conservative activist that we exploit, again, having us do our work for us. And we're going to talk about his newest release, which is one of his three-part series called America Under Siege Antifa, or Antifa. I call it Antifa. So, Trevor, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. And by the way, hello and big hug and embrace to Victoria.
Well, thank you, and I'll pass that on. Yeah, she's inside in the warm. Look, it's great to be on, Denise, and thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for the nice words.
Oh, well, they're deserved. I'm not making anything up. They're just deserved.
well, thank you. You're right up there, Denise. You're one of the best researchers out there, and I give you full credit for that.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm going to start off with this kind of question, and it might be a little on the weird side, but it kind of all boils down to this. This is 2017, and we are the freest country in the world. Why in the world are we even having and being forced to have free speech rallies in America?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. It was taken for granted for the last 200 years, and even when everything else was going to hell, or their education system or tax system or the government was growing, Americans always relied on the fact that the First Amendment would guarantee free speech. It was never really in question. The Supreme Court was always good about that, and now, you're having rallies shut down. We were going to show this movie at a premiere in Berkeley, and Milo Yiannopoulos tried to pay $65,000 to secure the venues, which was agreed to, and then Berkeley pulled the plug. And, basically what has happened is the left were so aggravated that they lost the last election, and they blame that on Fox News and the alternative media and the internet and the free speech rallies in the streets. They're doing everything they can to shut that down so that aberration doesn't happen again. That's why the Antifa is rampant in the universities and places like Berkeley. They want to shut down all conservative speech, all conservative rallies, all chances for conservatives to get together. And that's their plan.
Well, it's remarkable that in this day and time, and this is actually something that this movement, this Occupy, anti-capitalist, anti-constitution, pro-Marxist whole agenda has kind of been building, and I think it actually started off with the Occupy movement. But it's remarkable that we don't have more patriots. I mean, we got 360 million Americans here in the United States. And Trevor, I don't see a lot of people out in the streets taking these revolutionaries, if you will, the Antifa, that whole system, and taking them on in a more aggressive way. And I'm certainly not seeing the media helping that, because, I mean, the First Amendment means just as much to the media as it does to the individual, correct?
Well, you would think so. You'd think it'd be crucial. But really, what you have in this country now is a mainstream media that would be very happy to be part of the state apparatus. And under Hillary Clinton, there was talk. If Hillary Clinton won, there was talk of state funding for some of the major newspapers that are in major financial trouble. So they don't really care about free speech. They have long ago abandoned the notion of reporting the news. Their job is to help to shape the news along the proper narrative, and that is to the left. So they're going to look. There was a great little clip. Steven Crowder, the comedian, went undercover interviewed some Antifa people. They were talking about AK-47s, knives, guns, weapons, criminal activity. He got it on tape. He took it to 2 major news media outlets, and they just totally ignored it. Had no interest whatsoever. But if he'd done the same thing to a Tea Party group, and they were talking about violence, you imagine how they would have jumped on that.
The most sacrosanct thing that we have, I argue, is the First Amendment. And that's the reason I think the founders made it the First Amendment. It's the most treasured and should be protected amendment, really, of any of them. And yet, it's absolutely, when it comes to media, when it comes to a vote, when it comes to lobbying, when it comes to religion, when it comes to people that have websites that want to post things, when it comes to censorship, it is the most unprotected amendment, I think. I mean, there are certainly others. I mean, the Fourth Amendment and so forth and so on. But Trevor, it is 2017. I just can't kind of get it through my whole head that we're even having this conversation, and that colleges and universities are allowing this thing to fester.
Well, those colleges have been taken over by the Marxists long ago, and Marxists are notorious for suppressing freedom of speech. And the same with the mainstream media. And now you have the situation. See, if you look at Antifa, where the most violence has been is Boston, Charlottesville, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, Berkeley, Oakland, California. All of those places are controlled by left-wing Democratic city councils. So the police are basically doing the bidding of those councils, and in every place they've been told to stand down. They've been told to allow Antifa to run riot, to beat up people, to commit arson, trash cars, smash windows, you name it, with very little action by the police. Antifa is part of the machine. They are doing the things that the Democrats don't dare do publicly. They are squashing opposition speech and intimidating conservatives and patriots. And this is just like Hitler's black shirts, brown shirts. It's like Mussolini's black shirts. It's like the Antifa of the 1930s in Germany, the tool of the Communist Party. These are thugs designed to shut down free speech, nothing else.
So now what we have is essentially a watered down version of the First Amendment, and along with that, we are destroying any sense of law and order, of any, chaos is replacing law and order, correct?
Yeah, well, people are losing confidence in law and order. Look, remember in the old days, the KKK would march down a street, and the communists would come out to throw stones at them, and people would come out to throw stones at them, and the police would stand out there to protect them and stop violence. Remember when they were trying to bring black kids into schools in the southern United States?
Yes, yeah.
And the local sheriffs wouldn't do anything. So the federal authorities had to go down there, the National Guards, etc., had to go down there and enforce the law. But right now, people have no confidence that the law will stand on their side. I've had incidents. I talked to a top politician the other day who wanted to hold a conference in Colorado Springs, and the mayor of Colorado Springs said, "We will not grant you any services. There will be no police protection in the event of protesters." And this was a Republican mayor. So conferences are being shut down, events are not being held, people can't meet, confer, work together. This is a very serious situation.
So when a politician out of Washington, D.C. necessarily goes back into their district and they hold what they're supposed to do, town halls, and meet with their constituents, they're really not allowed to because the other voices have taken over.
That's right, and you've got Indivisible, which is doing that, purposely disrupting, Republican town halls and that. What we have to realize with Antifa is that it's not a single group, it's a franchise. So whoever is strong in that area, whether it's the local Democratic Socialists of America or the Revolutionary Communist Party or some other group, when it suits them, they just put on their black masks and they fly the flags and they become Antifa. So they're an arm of the left. They're an arm of whichever left-wing group is dominant in that region. And they are using the anonymity of the black ski masks to go out and commit violence and act like thugs. And the police, look, Donald Trump was elected on a platform of law and order. You imagine the public support he would get if he sent the feds in to start busting these groups up and start arresting the criminals amongst them.
It's kind of staggering that he hasn't done that. It's kind of staggering to me that there haven't been any congressional hearings where, in fact, some of these leaders, some of these school teachers that are, leading these groups in these cities are not being subpoenaed to show up before the House Oversight Committee or, some other, committees. And we're necessarily saying, where's your money coming from? Let's have, let's cough up some documents here, the memos, the training, the grassroots, the classroom stuff. Let's put it out on the table here. It's a mind blow that hasn't happened.
Well, yeah, these people are committing felonies every day. They're inciting to riot. They're committing arson, and nothing seems to happen. Like, if you remember back in 1968, the Chicago 7, the famous Chicago 7, Tom Hayden and others were arrested because they instigated riots at the Democratic Party convention that year in Chicago, massive riots. And they were arrested and tried for crossing state lines to start a riot. That was a felony. And that broke the back of that movement. Totally broke the back when they were prosecuted and jailed for that. Now, how many of these Black Lives Matter people and Antifa people are crossing state lines every day to start riots?
Well,
we know they do it all the time.
They do. Well, they're shutting down normal highways. September the 27th, they shut down part of the 101, which is just an important highway artery in California as the 405. They shut it down kind of as a dry run. Where were the state troopers? Where were the police? How are you supposed to move emergency vehicles? They were allowed to take over.
California's a Democratic state. Antifa is just part of the team.
Well, let me ask you this, and I may ask the question a couple of different times chatting with you. We have something called the Communist Act of 1954. Where is Jeff Sessions? Because, we clearly have the Carl Dixes of the world. We clearly have communists that are functioning with wild abandon and without any kind of restraint here in the United States. And we have this law and we're not applying it. How come?
Well, I don't know. Look, the Carl Dix, who's with the Revolutionary Communist Party, they control Refuse Fascism, which is one of the larger Antifa umbrella organizations. They are openly talking on their websites that they are going to start an insurgency against Donald Trump on November the 4th. This is a revolution.
It's
this is
sedition.
What they're saying. They're going to sedition. Exactly. This is illegal, and those guys get tax exempt status for some of their organizations. They run a program of sending books into prisons, revolutionary books, which is tax exempt. Can you believe it? So they are all openly preaching sedition and revolution, and quite open about it. They're committing crimes on a regular basis, and nothing is being done. So why is that? Does not Donald Trump not realize his entire presidency is under threat here, and his country is under threat from these people?
Is there a chance? There's been this discussion, but are they kind of finessing this and kind of ignoring it and waving it off for fear of a much larger and more militant revolution because some of these people would begin to be arrested?
Well, I don't think you may say maybe that's their rationale. They just want to diffuse this and let it all die naturally. but it ain't going to get diffused because it's back from foreign sources. You know, you've got people in these groups, Workers' World Party and Freedom Road Socialist Organisation, who are going to Russia to getting backing. You've got the Black Lives Matter people going to Palestine and working with terrorists over there. You've got some of these people tied to Cuba, some of them tied to Venezuela, even the supporters of North Korea amongst this lot. So these are foreign governments agitating in America. That's not going to go away. That's not going to be diffused. The only thing that's going to stop that is resolute action very, very quickly. We've all seen other countries where revolutionary situations have developed almost out of the blue, like, you know, in Iran and other places. No, but there's no guarantee something like this could not happen in America. At the very least, you could have major chaos and sabotage, and grid shutdowns and bombings that would kill many Americans. This could happen very, very quickly.
You used a term in your most recent documentary, America Under Siege, Antifa, and you used the term concept creep. Explain that. Yeah.
Well, concept creep is where a very specific word is used to further, the meaning is expanded to push an agenda. Well, you know, like once upon a time, a racist was someone who was really pushed their own race. They actively hated other races and denigrated other races and worked to suppress other races. That was a racist. Now today, according to Antifa and the left, a racist is anybody who supports border control or anybody who voted for Donald Trump. We're all racist now. You know, a Nazi used to be someone who supported Adolf Hitler, believed in, murdering Jews, who believed in the master race concept and socialized health care and government control of industry, as those National Socialists did. Now a Nazi is anybody who supported Donald Trump, anybody who believes in border control, anybody who believes in the Constitution. So when Antifa gets out there and say, we want to smash fascism, well, we got to understand that means anybody who opposes them. That means anybody who supported the president or the Republican Party or is a conservative. You're all Nazis now. You know, so that's concept creep. The concept has been expanded to use to push an agenda, to vilify a group. You know, every American who believes in the Constitution is now a Nazi, according to the left. And that's a massive expansion of the meaning of that word, and a totally bogus and false one as well.
And so those words that we have really never used, I mean, I don't remember them being used a lot during the, 70s and 80s and 90s. Now they're becoming part of the daily lexicon, right?
Yeah, look, I had a meeting in South Dakota, and this 14-year-old high school girl turned up, and she didn't realize who she was talking to. She said, look, I'm here to protest. And I said, well, what are you? This was a meeting of Republicans. These were 65-year-old South Dakotan school, moms and grandpas, This was the most gentle audience you could ever imagine. And I said, what are you here to protest? She said, my friend told me there are Nazis here tonight. I've come to protest the Nazis. And I said, well, look around. How many Nazis do you see? And this is like, going to a church, an Iowa church on a Sunday, ladies with nice hair and beautiful outfits and just the gentlest crowd you could ever imagine. But these were Nazis.
Uh-huh. And was she embarrassed?
Well, she sort of was. I said to her, well, do you know what you're protesting? And she said, oh, not really. And I said, do you think that might damage your credibility a little bit? She said, oh, I suppose it might. She wasn't the brightest, but she was being led into this by an older Svengali, who was sort of, she's obviously following this older girl who and the other funny thing was this older girl who led this group. I had her in the audience and I challenged, I said, look, you're here, you can ask questions, that's fine. So she asked the question, And I counted her, and at the end of that, the audience clapped. And she walked out of there saying, they heckled me. You know, there was no heckling. There was nothing negative. They just clapped what I said in a polite and gentle manner. But this was, you know, this is how the left is. They cannot lie straight in bed. They cannot tell the truth to save themselves.
No, they certainly can't. We've got a minute or two here before we come into the break. I want to, in your most recent film, America Under Siege, Antifa, you interviewed an awful lot of people. Were there any people that you went to that you wanted to interview to be part of this and they said no?
No, but a lot of people we wanted to work on the movie and do technical stuff for us said no. They didn't want their name on it. They feared retaliation. Both from Antifa and from Hollywood, you know, that if they were associated with a film like that, they would get blowback in Hollywood and would probably lose their jobs or not get contracts. So that was definitely there. The people were pretty brave actually, because we chose people who had been out there, who had put their bodies on the line. So they weren't shrinking violets. But there's a lot of people I know that I wouldn't have even considered. And it's just like the other day, I was talking to some guys organising big rally, free speech rally in Boston. They were shut down last time by 40,000 people who turned up and the cops doing nothing. Well, they want to do another rally, and they were promised all these local radio hosts would come and speak at the rally, and they were going to, you know, sound off. And now they ring them up to say, well, we're doing another one, and they don't get any replies. You know,
so now we have a fear of retribution. So the people that really want to stand up are just not. Yeah, they're just not going to do it because the consequences are wide and unpredictable.
Well, they are, and you know, Antifa is great at doxing people. They put people's names on the internet. They, which I do back to them, but they also they have been in Europe. They're well known for trashing people's houses, home invasions, beating people up, arsons, etc. So you don't want your business associated with this kind of thing because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen to your family. They're pretty vicious. So this climate of intimidation deters a lot of people from getting involved.
And essentially it's winning the argument.
Well, you imagine if Antifa was around in 2009 and smashing people up and assaulting people, how hard it would have been for those Tea Party rallies to have been held. You know, they would have all been shut down. The police would have said, oh, this is too dangerous, we won't give you a permit. You know, those massive 2 million strong Tea Party rallies may never have happened. You know, so what's going to happen in the future if we cannot rally people to our cause and hold political rallies and prayer meetings and First Amendment meetings and all these kind of things in simple town halls? You know, this has serious implications for the future of American politics if this is not dealt with very firmly. Or
for law and order or any kind of, you know, calm and equilibrium. I just don't see it necessarily recovering. Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Trevor Loudon, who's got a 3-part series, America Under Siege, and his most recent one is on Antifa, which we're talking about, and we're gonna do some more here after the commercial break. But you can find it on YouTube. So Trevor has been generous enough to just kind of put it out there for anybody to get their hands on and not only see it, but promote it and share it as much as you can. It's significant and scary and something that we need to pay some big attention to. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us after the break, and we got more coming your way.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued, from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place?
Then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
Hi, this is Denise Simon, the host of the Denise Simon Experience. I feel compelled to tell you people that Don Newen is my favorite talk radio host, period. Not Mark Levin, not Rush Limbaugh. I can't do this.
Do it, Denise. Read it. Read it, Denise.
Not Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, but yep, Don Newen. Cowboy Logic Radio is featuring the ever-stellar, highly gifted Don Newen, right here on Talk America Radio.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio. On behalf of my beautiful co-host, Donna Fiducia, I'd like to express my gratitude to Denise Simon for those kind words. I don't think I could have done it better if I would have written that myself. Cowboy Logic Radio, every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Talk America Radio. This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, where, you know, I'm so pleased to be part of some terrestrial radio operations, WJHC 107.5 FM, serving North Florida, and WLBB 1330 AM and 106.3 FM, serving West Georgia. So very happy that you could stay along for the ride. And we're having a fascinating conversation with Trevor Loudon, who is the patriot of the century, probably, but he has made a series of movies. His most recent one is America Under Siege, Antifa, and we're kind of giving you some piece parts to what is in this. You can find this movie on YouTube. Please do, so you can see the work that he has put into it and what is really under attack here, and that is First Amendment. The first question is, and we're 2017, and why are we even having to have a rally on the First Amendment on free speech, and why are we working so hard to defend it? Is because the left has taken it from us in a big, huge way. And if you haven't paid any attention, just go look at a college campus or two. So, Trevor, great work on the movie, and thanks for hanging here with us. A lot of these rallies, Trevor, have taken place in what I would call the most liberal of the cities that we have across the United States. And actually, I think if you took a transparency of sanctuary cities and laid it over the cities where these protests are going on, they'd almost be one and the same.
Absolutely. The template was fit exactly just about.
Yeah. So then that tells you that we have got problems with city councils, and we've got problems with some mayors, of which all of them enjoy some kind of federal funding. And I think Attorney General Jeff Sessions has tried to challenge the fact that when they get these block grants from the federal government to help pay for, certain infrastructure or police, augment, budgets for police and fire and rescue and those kinds of things, that some of these courts I said, okay, we'll just sue you for that. I hope Jeff Sessions in this Department of Justice is just not going to drop it on the floor and say, this is what we have to live with. Do you see that this Department of Justice is going to kind of stick to it to kind of restore some law and order around the country?
Well, I'm a bit disappointed in Jeff. Well, I'm more disappointed in Trump, because if he was backing Jeff Sessions up rather than hammering him all the time, we might actually see something. Jeff Sessions has a lot of power and discretion, but he's also got to take leadership from above. And I don't see that coming. I don't see, Trump got up after the Charlottesville disaster and said, there was blame on both sides, which there completely was. A very reasonable statement. But when he got hammered for that, he just didn't, fight back. He should have doubled down on that big time, but he didn't. And so he's not sending the right signals here. He's not coming. I haven't seen any statements he's made really against Antifa recently. He hasn't been attacking the sanctuary cities. He hasn't been nailing these mayors. And Jeff Sessions also has to contend with a Justice Department that's full of Obama, and Obama holdovers. But it frustrates me that I see these two men in those positions not doing a hell of a lot more and not saying a lot more publicly than they are. It's if they don't take these issues seriously or something.
I'm absolutely with you on that, and I'm especially concerned because the House had called for the impeachment or the removal of John Koskinen, the commissioner of the IRS. And yet he's still there. And the IRS is granting these groups here in the United States, these social justice groups, the Workers' World Parties and the Democrat Socialists of America and blah, 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 blah. They have nonprofit status. As do these Muslim organizations.
Many of their fronts do. There's millions of dollars a year flowing to these groups.
It's an outrage. If for nothing else,
when Ronald Reagan took over, one of the very first things, there was a guy appointed to go through all these left-wing grants and cut them off. Just defund the radical movement. But nothing had been done to do that this time. They're still getting millions of dollars from foundations, from unions, from the taxpayer, and we are funding our own revolution.
I'm glad you said that, because about a week ago, something dawned on me, and it had to do with this whole NFL take a knee kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, the NFL has a players union, and it's called the NFLPA, the NFL Players Association. And fascinatingly enough, the AFL-CIO, which is led by Richard Trumka, which has got 12.5 million members, he does a good bit of the collective bargaining for the NFL Players Union. In fact, the NFL Players Union is under the umbrella as an associate union of the AFL-CIO. So I got, all right, that's fascinating. But here's the other thing that barely got a blip in the media, and that is right after Charlottesville, Trevor, you might remember that Trump had these outside councils. We had a council on manufacturing, and we had a council on economic development. Okay. And all of a sudden, these CEOs from these corporations around the United States started resigning. And Trump was really forced to terminate these councils. And one of the people that bailed out and quit because of Charlottesville was Richard Trumka. Well, right after that, we started taking a knee in the NFL. So I started poking around and I said, all right, the AFL-CIO website, interestingly enough, says this in part, and this was a statement that Trumka made. Racism plays an insidious role in the daily lives of all working people of color. This is a labor issue because it is a workplace issue. It is a community issue, and unions are the community. Philando Castile, one of the, victims that I don't know what city, maybe Baltimore, was a union member, and so was his family. Last year, the AFL-CIO launched a commission on racial and economic justice. This is what the AFL-CIO did, to address the issues faced by our brothers and sisters of color and to take a hard look at ourselves to ensure we practice what we preach. It is haunting that only 2 years ago I delivered a speech in St. Louis in the aftermath of Mike Brown's death denouncing the systematic racism in the United States. Since then, hundreds of people have lost their lives in incidents involving police officers, and African Americans continue to be disproportionately impacted. Labor cannot and will not sit on the sidelines when it comes to racial justice. It is not enough to simply say Black Lives Matter. We must and will continue to fight for reforms in policing and to address issues of racial and economic inequality. So
that's very interesting. Sorry, Karen.
I was only going to say that he was on the Trump Manufacturing Advisory Board.
Yeah, he was. Now, see, the Communist Party used to say racism is capitalism. To end racism, you must end capitalism. And this is what this is all about. This is using racial division to basically end the American free enterprise system. As David Horowitz famously says, the issue is never the issue is always the revolution. These people don't give a damn about race. They don't give a damn about black people or Latino people. They are using them as meat in the revolution, using them to stoke racial division. The communists have a phrase for this. It's called the nationalities question. It was developed by Stalin. You get a minority, whether it's blacks in America or Native Americans, or it's the Samic people in Finland, or it's a minority race in Nigeria, or it's the Maoris in New Zealand, or the Aboriginals in Australia, and you get amongst them and you foment this sense of grievance. You pick over every old sore you can, and you create as much racial division as possible to divide that society and bring it to its knees. This is classic Marxist technology here. Black Lives Matter is not a bunch of young ladies who got upset about African American guys being killed by police. It is 3 hardcore associates of the Maoist Freedom Road Socialist Organization who got together and plotted to start a racially divisive movement in this country. And Richard Trumka, a consummate Marxist himself, is and the AFL-CIO, which is completely controlled by communists and Marxists now, they are just pushing this divisive agenda because their agenda is a revolution in America.
Names like Andy Z and Carl Dix and Jeremy Scahill and Gloria Steinem and, Chase Iron Eyes and Isabel Cardenas, all of these people and more, including the imam of the Park 51 mosque that was supposed to go in at Ground Zero. These are all people that we can throw in with the same Bill Ayers, Charles Gaines, Niles Eldridge, Cornel West. Do we have some people in your experience, in your travels, that have actually infiltrated some of these groups and have files on these people such that a case could easily be built that we could apply the Communist Act of 1954 or some sedition act against these people at all? Please say yes.
I don't know, because the FBI used to consistently infiltrate these people, all the time. Now they infiltrate the Tea Party. So look, all of those people you mentioned are involved with Refuse Fascism, and Andy Z and as a well-known member of the Revolutionary Communist Party is one or two of the others that you mentioned.
Carl Dix, yeah.
And Carl Dix, of course. Now, so this is a complete front for the Revolutionary Communist Party. Bill Ayers, the mentor to Barack Obama, the man who started Barack Obama's political career, was also an endorser. And this is a broad revolutionary front. These are the people who say they're going to start an insurgency on November the 4th. Now, when has it ever been legal in America to publicly proclaim that you're going to start an insurgency? You know, a military insurgency against
We barely
government.
do that in a combat zone.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, so this is a declaration of war, and these people have a history of violence. The Revolutionary Communist Party are the people who burn American flags. They've been doing it for 30 years. All of the famous flag burning cases in America have been Revolutionary Communist Party people. And the leader of it is Bob Avakian, who spent many years in Paris as an exile, and they model their revolution on the Shining Path guerrillas of Peru, who were particularly brutal Maoists, slaughtered a whole bunch of people, and they were eventually shut down by the Peruvian military, thankfully. But these are people with a history of revolutionary violence, militant activists who say they want to start a revolution in America. I sort of thought that might be some red flag to the authorities, no pun intended. But it seems to be okay. It seems to be perfectly acceptable. You know, see, the last time we saw communists rounded up was in 2010 when the FBI raided the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in Minneapolis and Chicago and arrested a whole bunch of them and charged them with working with terrorists in Palestine and Latin America, which they completely do. They're completely involved with them, and the Philippines as well. And that prosecution never went forward because the Obama Justice Department never did anything with it. Mm-hmm. You know, but these are people actively aiding terrorists and aiding terrorists against our allies in Colombia and against our allies in Israel and against our allies in the Philippines, or our former allies in the Philippines. So it seems to be revolutionary terror, plotting against the government. It seems to be sort of de rigueur these days. It seems to be quite socially acceptable. And I think it's about time Donald Trump and the Justice Department started making it very unacceptable. And I think the people of America would applaud him thunderously if he did so.
Well, I guarantee you it'd be force multiplying for him if he did, you know, especially going into the midterms.
Exactly. Maybe he's hanging off for a while to make a big splash. That's what I'd like to think.
Okay.
But I really think the government's clueless on this. That's my honest opinion.
In your movie, Trevor, you refer to the Black Bloc. You actually go back to the German Communist Party. I have seen where in Germany there was a building. I actually looked at the picture, wrote an article about it some time ago, where the Antifa logo, if you will, is the exact same logo that was used back then, except it was faced the other direction. So this has got a lot of historical facts to it, correct?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Trotsky was the man who first founded Antifa-type units in Russia. You know, bunches of thugs who were set loose on anybody who opposed communism. And then they got their name in fascist Italy. In the war, the struggle between the Marxists and Mussolini's black shirts in the 1920s, they were antifascista, Antifa. And then they really got famous in Germany in the 1930s when the Communist Party set up Antifa units, tens of thousands of people who were battling in the streets against the brown shirts and anyone else who stood against the communists. And interestingly, when Hitler won, when he crushed the German Communist Party, he had 600,000 brown shirts at one stage. One internal report said that 55% of them were former communists or socialists. They switched sides. They were the same kind of people. You know, they were just one bunch of thugs fighting another bunch of thugs, and when one bunch of thugs wins, the people switch over. Just like, you know, mafia gangs, if one mafia gang destroys another, they tend to recruit the people from the opposite gang, and that's what happened. You know, Antifa has no moral high ground. They're just a bunch of thugs, and they would be just as happy being fascists as non-fascists. They wouldn't understand the difference.
So, have you sent your movie to Trey Gowdy at the Oversight Committee, or have you sent it over to Michael McCall, the Department of Homeland Security, or committee, or, you know, even to John Kelly at the White House?
No, I can't say I have, but those are excellent ideas, actually. I was hoping they would filter up to those people, and maybe they have, but I think we should be more proactive and send them directly to them.
Well, look, you know, you've proven the case beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, when you go back to the Black Bloc, the German Communist Party, you know, the Trotsky thing, the Workers' World Party. I mean, I don't think you can do a FOIA request to get their, you know, tax status. Meaning, yeah, I don't think you can do that. Although, you know, if Lois Lerner was still there and you were a leftist, you probably could. But the evidence is there, such that you could embarrass. With a little bit of help, you can embarrass this Justice Department, and I would argue some of the attorneys general in these respective states that they would have to they would have to make some big excuses not to do their own investigation and to prosecute. That's the part I think is more scary to me than anything. I don't think they're clueless, because I know that these Congress people go back into their respective districts, and I know they're being shut down. I've heard them say they're shut down by these people. They go back into Washington, D.C. after summer break or their August whatever recess, and they, you know, are saying, these are the people. I've heard them name some of these groups, including those that are very much aligned with the Hillary Clinton world. And it's kind of like, well, we're not going to argue about it. We're just going to go do Facebook Live kind of presentations, and we don't want to get involved. We got other work to do. Which says to me, there's no will, there's no fire in these bellies. And I guess, Trevor, that's the most upsetting thing of them all.
Well, that is, you know, we like to think the federal government is there to protect our freedoms, to protect our First and Second Amendments. And we've got a bunch of thugs marauding around the country trying to shut that all down. And our federal government, which we pay taxes to, which is bound by the Constitution, seems to be doing nothing. And that, as you say, is the most upsetting thing of all and the most frightening thing of all.
And you can't dispute the evidence. I mean, even if you go back to the historical evidence that you've presented, that's one thing. But the evidence is that you've got a Congressman, you know, Louis Gohmert, or a Duncan Hunter that can't go into his district and have a town hall because he's being shut down by a Black Lives Matter movement or some kind of Antifa contingency. So he ends up essentially cheating his own voters and cheating his district because he can't have a conversation with them. So they can't do their jobs.
He's supposed to be the representative of that area. Well, how can he represent if he cannot communicate?
Yeah,
if he
precisely.
can't get feedback, if he can't listen to the people's concerns. So Antifa is stopping representative government. But they have no interest in representative government. So you're right. They're stopping a key function, or the key function of your representative system of government.
So we have this thing coming up on November the 4th. And I would argue between, you know, they've got a month, and they've been doing this for several months, that they're having these training classes and they're having these confabs and they're passing out pamphlets and having conference calls and raising money and hiring buses and all these other kinds of things. If this is a successful event on November the 4th, where they're gathering in the streets and public arenas of cities and towns across the United States, I would argue if they're successful on the 4th, we're going to have one on December the 4th, January the 4th, February the 4th. You know what I'm saying? We're going to have one every month.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
They're gaining traction.
Well, they learned from the Arab Spring. You know,
Yes.
where masses of people, that's what they think. They think if masses of people can gather and they can defy the federal government and the police do nothing, you alter the balance of power. They become the power and the government crumbles. That's really what their fantasy is. Now, I don't know if they've got the strength to do that, but I am concerned that they could do a hell of a lot of damage and create a lot of mayhem in the process, even if they're not successful. And if they are successful, well, we can just kiss freedom goodbye from that point.
I think
too. These people are Maoists. The Maoist counter-insurgencies, the Maoist insurgency strategy. They've set up little outposts all over the country. They've built their strength. They've got cities sympathetic to them, and now they want to challenge the federal government. Well, maybe they've got the strength to do it, maybe they haven't. But allowing people to mount an insurgency inside your own territory is not a good idea for any conservative government, is it? You know, why is this being allowed to happen?
Or they get a permit. And I think that we ought to start challenging some of these permits, or they have to put up a $2 million liability insurance policy for any damage that they do. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Trevor Loudon, activist, conservative activist, successful author, successful movie producer, with his most recent American Under Siege, Antifa. And please, please, please trot on over to YouTube to grab it, watch it, and share it. And Trevor, hat tip and thank you for the good work that you have been doing constantly along with your team, and certainly for your time here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, look, always a pleasure, Denise. It's great talking to you, and it's great to talk to people who understand the issues. That really makes I learn, we all learn out of it. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and we'll see you again shortly.
All right, good deal. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and we'll see you again very soon.